showing up today, and nice to bring you into the talented circle. So, the state of the 2016 LMS market, it's bigger, it's stronger, and it's more diverse than it ever was. There's a focus now on customer service. There's been an explosion of innovation, and extended enterprise and not talent management is what's driving the marketplace. In any case, I'm John Lay. I'm the CEO and lead analyst at Talented Learning. I have 20 years experience in the learning technology marketplace, and 13 of those years I've spent where I spent selling high-end learning management systems. And my family and my kids and my great-grandfather all have the same saying here is everything's easy once you know how. And one of the things we thought when we founded Talented Learning is that it was hard for buyers to understand, to know how in terms of buying a learning management system, because the marketplace had really not a lot of independent research on the market, and what was out there was really focused on talent management and integrated talent management, which focused on the top 10 LMS vendors in the marketplace, but not what was going on in the broader swath of LMS activity into the marketplace. And so after 13 years of selling learning management systems, 2 years ago I hung up my shoes and co-founded Talented Learning. And what we wanted to do was be just fiercely independent research learning technology research consultants. And so we started going LMS by LMS and created a methodology of how we would try to map this marketplace. And all of us have heard that there's hundreds of LMSs inside the marketplace, and we wanted to map it and find out why. What's past the top 10? What's really going on, and what's driving the marketplace, and how can all these LMSs survive out in the marketplace? And none of these answers were apparent from the research. And so we went one by one and now have researched and interviewed and had in-depth reviews of 111 learning management solutions. Along the way, we've been freely blogging all of our results. And we now have over 100 serious blog articles and webinars and recorded webinars that we've done on all things learning management, buying learning management, thinking about requirements of learning management. And all in all, our organization helps LMS buyers and sellers buy and sell better. As of today, we released our first publication, the 2016 LMS Almanac, and we'll share a little bit more with that along the way. And you'll see excerpts of that today here in the data. But the agenda of what I wanted to cover today is brief everybody on kind of how far we've come real quick as an LMS industry, and what's happening in a relatively short time to transform our industry from a few major players to now hundreds and hundreds of viable learning management systems. And to do that, I would frame it up in terms of the top 5 trends that I think are driving the market, or maybe not the top, but top 5 that are certainly impacting the marketplace and how the need in the marketplace, and then the vendor response, the vendor community response to that. That's going to kind of flow naturally, hopefully, into the 4 types of LMS that exist now in 2016, and how that's different previously, and kind of what's different and unique about each one of these types of LMSs. And then finally to go into the actual LMS market trends, so revealing some of the data that we've collected, and to show you how diverse this marketplace is, and exactly what we're talking about when we say the innovation explosion. And then finally, I'll have a preview. Most likely this is after our allotted time, so if anybody is interested in actually seeing the almanac now that it's available, I'll take you through that and show you some of the pieces of it. I kind of love that, like a parent loves a baby, and hopefully it's not an ugly one. But let me start off by talking about the historical LMS market. And for a long time, for anybody that's been using LMS systems or selling LMS systems, really over the last 3 decades, there's really 2 basic camps of learning management systems. There was the academic, and then there was the the corporate system, and there wasn't a whole lot of overlay between the two camps of learning management system, because the differences of corporate trainees and employees was just so different than how academia approached the learning process, that it was hard trying to be both, and most organizations did it. And the corporate LMS is really focused on compliance and talent primarily, while the academic ones focused on student progression. But what happened, and because of that, there was really only a dozen or maybe 15 viable competitors for a long time. These competitors changed names as they acquired and merged with each other over time, but it's still the same handful of competitors that was around in 2016, or excuse me, 2000. It was around in 2010, and in some flavor still around today. But those historical or traditional learning management systems were really expensive to buy, and they were expensive and took a lot of time to implement, and it was a serious commitment for organizations to maintain that through time, and a cost and a time commitment. And as a result, it was only the organizations that really had the biggest compliance problems, certainly on the corporate side, that could afford to have a learning management system, because otherwise it was very nice to have. Because of how expensive it was, it had to be for a reason that solved the compliance risk or a fiscal risk of an organization not being in compliance. And because LMSs were so expensive and there was so much time to implement and set one up, there was always a lot of customer dissatisfaction. And I think we've all heard it in the industry. And this goes even recently. Even I've read things in 2016 where the LMS vendors really take, I think, an unfair industry view. They take a lot of heat for all the things that go wrong in the industry, and not a lot of credit for what goes right. And I think what you see all the time is rule number one is vendors are bad, and rule number two, LMS rule number one. And but I think that's wrong, and I think the market's evolved, and I'm going to show you how. And I think by starting off to talk about the trends is the best way to show that the old view of the LMS market is exactly that. It's a new market with a new focus on customer success, and actually helping organizations become a profit center with learning management versus just being a cost center inside an organization. So here's what happened. Number one, in my view, in our view, trend number one, there's been a culture change. And that culture change is multifold, but it's happened over the last couple of generations, though it's just manifested itself now in learning management system. But what happened is that just individuals in general, there's been a migration from having a career at one organization to having many roles at the same or multiple organizations throughout your career. It's not the expectation of really anybody coming out of university or high school that they're going to be at the same organization or employed by the same organization till the day they retire, though that wasn't the case not so long ago. But because of that change, previously corporations used to be responsible for all aspects of developing and professional development of somebody throughout their career. And HR and training departments staffed up accordingly, but now it's really up to the individuals. It always was to a degree, but now fully up to the individuals to worry about their own progression, their own adding of skills, knowledge, and capabilities throughout their career, so they can take more and more strategic roles over time. But previously, the LMS was central to all of that learning, but now learning is everywhere, on the internet, social media, on mobile phones, inside the LMS, inside any place where they can go buy learning management system, and it's no longer just delivered via desktops and laptops, but now primarily on mobile devices, or certainly increasingly on mobile devices. And learners have kind of just been pulled out from their right in front of their laptops, learning all by themselves, to now learning in groups and social learning. And all that culture change has made traditional LMS systems kind of non-functional inside a lot of aspects of today, the way learners learn today. But the second thing that changed simultaneously while all this was going on about a culture change is the cloud came, and it really changed. It changed everything. Cloud's been around for a while, certainly the internet, but the concept of having cloud software, which is a vendor, an LMS vendor will put one copy, think of it as their LMS up in the cloud, up in the internet, and all customers are using that same version of the LMS. They all have their own secure area and their own users and content, and they're all unaware of who their neighbors are on this particular LMS system, but they're all on the same LMS system. And that has a lot of advantages for both the vendor and for the buyers of LMSs. And one of the advantages is it knocks all the IT involvement out of an LMS purchase and implementation. Not all of it, but a lot of it, because previously much of the implementation cost and length inside the process was due to buying servers and speccing them out and finding what operating system and getting your databases and all that kind of stuff. And now all that's already done because it's up and operational in the cloud. And so it's easier for buyers to maintain it and for sellers to maintain the application. And the cloud providers have automated a lot of things that have taken time previously, like integration with standard systems like virtual classroom or CRM or single sign-on. A lot of those are now out of the box check boxes versus the integrations of yesteryear that cost $10,000 or $15,000. The cloud providers, because it is in the cloud, they added the features that we're used to in the cloud: mobile, social, e-commerce, gamification. All those things have enhanced and spiced up the LMS experience well past the compliance and talent aspects of before. But what it really has done, the cloud has eliminated the barrier of entry for new LMS vendors. There's no longer 12 or 700 or almost 700, because LMS vendors can start small now, target a very small specialized area of the marketplace and grow their solutions, and that's exactly what they do. And that's why there's so many LMS vendors, because the cloud has enabled a new type of business model. And the new business model is the SaaS business model, which is really advantageous for both vendors and buyers, which has led to a correction a lot of that dissatisfaction, because now both vendors and buyers are incentivized to really be on the same page. And so before, what happened is that organizations had to buy a perpetual license, and that means they had to spend $100,000 or $1 million up front for the license, and they would then every year pay a certain amount to maintain that license, get their technical support and access to upgrades. But the implementations were also very expensive and always six figures, commonly six figures, and because of that, there could be 200, 150, 500, $1 million that was spent by an organization before they got any benefit out of the system. And because vendors had to keep on selling new licenses to generate enough revenue to run their company, vendors were always under a high level of stress for that next sales opportunity, that next deal. And what ended up happening is customers were the ones that were left out in the cold. They got less than stellar customer support, and vendors were less incentivized to provide it since they already got paid all their money up front. But what the SaaS business model did is kind of really flip that all around. And now you don't pay your license up front, you pay as you go, either on an annual or even a monthly basis. And it can be based even on the actual usage of the system. So if you have an audience of 5,000 but only 1,000 logged in a particular year or a particular month, you only pay for that. And so it made it much more fair of paying for what you use as you go. And because it's up in the cloud, it lowered the implementation cost and the setup, and because it took a lot of those complexities out. And all of this has made a lower need for vendors to add new clients. Even if most of these vendors didn't add any clients in a given year, the reoccurring revenue of a customer paying for what they're actually using over time is very predictable, and they can scale their business and grow much more slower than the days before. And as a result, customers can, or excuse me, LMS vendors can and do spend a lot more time on customer support and satisfaction and making sure their customers are happy, because the cost to keep a customer or the benefit of keeping a customer is way better than trying to get a new one. And so in a relatively short period of time, it's all changed of that focus on customer satisfaction. And so at Talented Learning, what we've done recently, as we went one by one on these vendors and we did our research, as we were collecting this information, we went back and created this really a massive survey. It took the poor vendors hours per each vendor to fill this thing out. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to map not only the functional capabilities of the industry, but all aspects of why customers buy them, industries they compete in, to really try to get an understanding of what's different about all these different vendors. And one of the things that was interesting is that 71% of the vendors are competing and winning on the fact that they provide superior customer service. And we thought that was really interesting, especially considering the negative or perceived negative view of LMS vendors. And so that leads us to the trend number 4. So just because there's a cloud and new vendors can come in, how can you unseat the traditional players? So, Saba and SumTotal Systems and SAP SuccessFactors and Oracle and IBM and Infor are all massive HR or enterprise ERP organizations that have broad suites of product that run corporations' whole infrastructure, learning being one of them. And it seems like, certainly from an analyst view and from all those competitors that I just mentioned, they have the market all buttoned up. And they really do. When you talk about the corporate large-scale market, those handful of players really have it buttoned up. But what happens, or what has happened, is that's not where the growth in the industry is. In the small and medium-sized marketplace, organizations aren't sprinting to buy integrated talent management systems and to try to do this all at once. It's just too confusing and too much at once. And so LMS is much more of a standalone purchase, but even more so, corporations have now come to the realization that learning is a strategic tool that it can be used or should be used towards their non-employee audiences also. Who are the value chain in that organization? The channel partners that help sell an organization's product, the customers that are using it, the potential customers or prospects that may be using a prospect, or all audiences in addition to employees that organizations have and do train. The challenge is, and they do this because they can move and prove that it actually moves a metric. And so people are selling more or less. We'll get to that in a second. But why this is really important is that the buying points or the owners of the initiatives that train external audiences don't reside, or typically do not reside, in HR. They reside in the business functions, in business units, in the sales functions, in the channel or marketing type functions inside an organization, and not in HR. And because of this, unless there is a specific initiative by HR to have one centralized learning management system for all these groups, it never happens. It never works the other way. It never starts in customer learning, and then the customer learning folks say, hey, HR, why don't you use our LMS? It never works that way. It only works in reverse. So as a result, in many organizations now, extended enterprise LMSs are springing up all over because the cost to do so is inexpensive, and the implementation is inexpensive, and the buying points are different, and so organizations are going solo. And as a result, this is driving new vendors into the marketplace to focus specifically on those extended enterprise. And that's exciting because they're leaving a lot of the bad habits in HR, or that were developed with pure HR and mandatory learning systems, behind, which leads us to number 5. Organizations are learning that learning is a competitive differentiator, not by talent development and not by just increasing the leadership capabilities or improving your content or compliance, but rather actually using learning to move business metrics. Can we make the channel sell more? Can we make or facilitate customers to renew at a higher rate, or to buy complementary products, or to upsell themselves to premium products? Can we reduce the calls to customer support? And by training external audiences or using learning for internal and external audiences and measuring the actual business impact, strategic organizations have shifted LMSs from that cost to a profit center, to a tool that actually allows organizations to compete better. And the people that are doing this are, unfortunately, typically not in HR, but they're the business side of the house that are using this just like any other tool, a CRM or an ERP tool inside the organization. And so the audience of who buys and uses LMS systems has drastically expanded. And now there's almost 700 LMS vendors. We've gotten to 111 of them. We think it is critical mass to be able to now talk and make predictions about the broader mass of them, but we're on a mission to meet all of these and to cover all of these for you over time. But just some diversity that's out there. And New Spring is out of Holland and has really neat interactive ways for employees to learn that's not formal learning. Know-it-all aggregates content from every possible source, and MOOC. Litmus is one of the new cloud SaaS providers that can have implementations of 25 or 35,000 people, all the way down to 3 users, all from the same cloud-based system. Core, a great all-purpose LMS system out of Idaho. eLogic Learning, another one. Docebo is on the bottom there, another cloud-based system. Saba and SumTotal still exist. But all of these Risk specializes in compliance and oil and gas, and Grovo and micro learning, and Access Planet and training companies, and Avila in continuing education and associations, and just the diversity of Blackboard, who was always a corporate, or excuse me, an academic, is now branching out into extended enterprise corporate space and doing really well. And these vendors have all found a way to specialize in a variety of different verticals and business functions. But what happens, unfortunately for buyers, all these choices, is analysis paralysis of trying to figure out what all these vendors do and why they do it differently, and does it matter? You know, can't you just buy one of the name brand ones that everybody knows for decades, and can't you just buy that LMS and use that? Yeah, probably, except that they're the most expensive one, and they have tons of features and functionality that you may not need or require, that you're paying for indirectly and you're paying to support. So if you can find, or a buying organization can find, a specialist that does exactly what they need, that's the trick. But when buyers go out and they start Googling LMSs or going to the different things, it's just like the old story of the blindfolded people that are touching the different parts of the elephant and asked to describe it, and they're all right. You know, it could be a rope or a wall or a spear or a fan, depending on where in that elephant you're touching. And that's just like the LMS market, because it's so diverse, and there's so many different names: online training center, learning training center, e-learning, universities, content portals, learning management systems, content learning management systems, e-commerce training. I mean, there is just a ton of different names and functionality that is used to describe those 700 different vendors, and the vendors use those same names to describe them. So there's no universal definition on what these learning systems are, which adds to the confusion in the marketplace, and that all. But what we've done at Talented Learning, and what we've tried to do, is we've gone through each one of these LMSs, and we've learned from a business and from a functional and from a technical and a professional service and an ongoing support standpoint what they do and who they target and where they target. And it took us 2 years, and we wanted to get to a critical mass of 100 LMSs before we shared this data. But the new view of the LMS marketplace is that it's not just academic and corporate systems, but there's academic, there's corporate, there's continuing education, and there's association learning management systems. And granted, they have a lot of overlap because they all manage users and content and the relationship between the two. But each one of these specializations has exactly that, specializations and specialized requirements and needs by buyers in that sector that the others don't provide. And it's in these unique areas that all the innovation in our industry is happening. And it's also in the e-commerce area of really turning and converting learning management systems from compliance systems to almost learning marketing systems is what's going, is the current trends of the marketplace. And so, but it's these 5 things: functional requirements, technical requirements, the professional service capability, the level of ongoing support, and how they approach license and budget is different in all 700 of these LMS companies and in all of the 4 different types. And so to just find an LMS by Googling it in today's day and age is really pushing a rock uphill. It needs to be much more strategic. And let me show you what I mean here. So I asked 75 different vendors, what their LMS was good for, and I let them check any boxes that they want. What's interesting is that it's all over the board because vendors don't know where they fit in those 4 circles, and they're not aware that those 4 circles exist. And so a lot of vendors think their LMS is good for everything, but nobody apparently that we asked thought it was good for everything. So even at the high voluntary level, vendors recognize that they have strengths and weaknesses in the different types of applications of learning management system, whether that's for HR in talent or whether that's for extended enterprise. From a hosting model standpoint, look at the diversity. It wasn't long ago between everything was an on-premise or a third party, and then private cloud or ASP or hosted model surfaced. But that true cloud, that SaaS cloud that I'm telling you about, 79% of those 75 vendors that we surveyed have an option where they have that one version in the cloud. So in less than 10 years, that segment didn't even exist, and now it occupies 79% of the market. I think that's remarkable in itself, and that's why it's changing all these aspects of pricing and of who can actually buy a learning management system. And then there's those new license models we talked about. So we asked vendors what license model that they offer and what license model that they prefer. And it's basically usage-based, like we were describing before. On an annual basis is the primary way that buyers like to buy and sellers like to sell right now, versus named user, which was you have 1,000 employees and you have to have 1,000 licenses regardless of whether they use it or not. So the new license models have gotten very friendly when it's usage based on an annual basis, and then also that organizations still prefer to buy that unuser or that unlimited user license, which is a great way to fix your cost and then grow your solution. And there's a nice trend of organizations that provide unlimited, where that was really out of vogue for a long time, but these cloud providers can do that. Something else that surfaced in the research is that there was the shrinking of the implementation fees. And so I've hinted at this, of course, with the deployment of the cloud model and the cloud models of how that simplifies it. But look where organizations are saying that they price. So I asked typical implementation fees. So typical, of course, you would imagine that vendors are going to go on the typical low side, and so these are on the low side. But what I do know is that there is public pricing that's available now on these cloud-based sites, and so you can see exactly what implementation fees and license fees are. We categorized everything that we could find out on the open internet, even outside the organizations that we researched, and still 26% just allow you to turn on a domain and start getting inside your learning management system. Now, is that enough services? Probably not, unless you're just starting out or you're a very small organization, then it might just be perfect. And the same goes to that $1,000 to $5,000 range, or even up to the $10,000 range. There's a lot of options inside those new 700 where you don't have to spend $50,000 or $60,000 to implement your system, or $100,000 or $150,000 to implement your system. Now, that being said, there's a note of caution there that organizations that are on their second or third or fourth LMS and have 10 or 20 or 100,000 users in 1 or 10 different countries around the world with different business units, shouldn't kid themselves that they can get a free or a $5,000 implementation. It still costs $100,000 or $200,000 or more for something like that. But it's the standard implementations for the smaller and the extended enterprise where there's not a lot of historical data or baggage or all the complex compliance rules that drive up a typical implementation. But what happened is that those LMS vendors have really kind of aggregated or categorized themselves into these different types of vendors. They're the ones that are going for the low-cost, free self-service. Set yourself up as fast as you can, and we'll grow from there. There's a whole bunch of assisted setup LMS vendors that are typically under about $20,000, and they provide remote services to help organizations that are buying get set up. But it's not like it used to be with the full service implementation services where you're getting project teams that come on site multiple times for workshops and administrative training and do different integrations that may be custom and single sign-on and offer strategic advice. Those type of full-service vendors, because of the cloud, have really shrunk. And so with needs that are down that vein, buying organizations have to be very careful to make sure that what they're buying is on the same level of expectations of what vendor services are offering. And in 2016, there's a lot of miscommunication, I believe, still, especially among LMS buyers that have complex needs, because it looks like all there is this low-cost, low-touch involvement, and that's not the case, but it can appear that is the case. And then finally, there's always the need for the global providers and the system integrators. These are the folks that take Saba and SumTotal and Cornerstone, and they apply hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of services to deploy on a global basis, and that truly is the 1%. But those type of organizations. And so in every one of those circles, academic, the 4 types of LMS, academic and corporate and continuing education and association, there exists the same range of professional services in 2016. Just look at the range of administrative support options that LMS vendors provide now. Primarily it's email-based to get any administration done with phone and online tickets following that up. Named account managers, so that big focus on customer service. Named account managers, I think, is a way that organizations are really shoring up that customer service by providing a single point or a couple points of contact that really understand the buying organization and the LMS client, so that they can provide the best service possible. Less than half of organizations now are providing managed services or around-the-clock administrative support. And learner support is even less. So if you need a help desk to help with your support, very few or less than half of vendors even offer any type of end learner support at all. And so this tends to be a big differentiator in 2016, because with extended enterprise audiences, a lot of times you don't know who they are, you don't know what devices they're coming in, you don't know what browser versions they have. You can't control any of that like employee LMSs can. And as a result, there is considerations from a help desk and learner support standpoint that are more pronounced, especially when you're trying to get somebody to buy your content than in employee learning management systems. And it's also neat to just look at it from an industry standpoint. So we asked all of these vendors, what are the top industries, the top 3 industries that you sell in? And in some ways we were surprised, in some ways not, because when you look at this list, you could say which industries are the biggest users of extended enterprise, and the chart would look almost identical here, because healthcare has lots of extended enterprise audiences for continuing medical education, or medical device or pharmaceutical providers are always training doctors and providers and physicians to on their products and services. High tech and software, as we talked about, is a huge user to train your channel and your users and your new customers. Financial, the same way of reselling financial services, financial investment brokers. All those folks need to be trained, and they're not your employees. But down on the other end, the industries that are very compliance, pure compliance focused, employee focused, LMS vendors just aren't targeting them. If our LMS works for you, that's great, but we're not targeting it. Where they're targeting is where they can find extended enterprise initiatives that are actually moving the business needle, that are profit-based, and that's where the vendors in 2016 think it's fun to compete, and that's where they're competing, because it is about being a profit center. So the big difference is the difference between employee and voluntary learners. So employee learners are compulsory learners. You tell them that they need to take training, and they have to take training. And as a result, LMS vendors didn't need to focus a lot on user interface, or how it looked or felt, or how engaging it was, or any of those softer things. It was immaterial. You were required to take that training. But on the other side, where all the innovation is happening is because of the concept of voluntary learning. Everybody that you can't compel, you need to entice. And you have to find them. You have to allow them to find you, get them into your LMS, into your environment, search your content, find content, purchase content, do that in a streamlined way that doesn't frustrate them, open up, launch the content, and do that on a way on their mobile devices so that there's no problems along the way. That whole process and getting them to do it again and again over time, those are all challenges, both from a business process and from a technical standpoint, that HR or internal employee or traditional LMS vendors haven't had to deal with. And it's those new features that are really driving the space. And so just let me show you some examples. United, not United, the United Rentals. What they do is they rent all kinds of tractors and lifts and all that stuff. So they created a university for any of their people that are reselling it or using these type of products to drive down their safety incidents, and to improve customer experiences in using their software. Yum Brands, who has Pizza Hut, KFC, and Taco Bell franchises globally, thousands of stores, uses the LMS as a enhancement, or rather a benefit for each franchise to have everything that they need, from all the content, all the roles, everything to onboard new employees, to basically run their whole learning business is available from a franchise by franchise basis, so that they don't have to invent it over. And so a strategic tool to get franchises up and operational faster, and to drive that corporate standard even across your non-employee audiences. Talk about software companies of every size, flavor, shape, training not only their employees, but a software company of 100 or 200 employees might have 1 million or 2 million customers or users or organizations that are using that software. And as a result, there's just no way that you can continue to release products and services and do that in an efficient way without an active and strategic extended enterprise. Organizations are using this not just to sell content, but organizations that aren't content companies, like this digital defense organization, for example, has SaaS-based software that helps you with the security of your networks. They decided to roll out a secure ed curriculum of content, just as a complementary content. And so they now offer both, and it's the same audience, but just integrating content into the way that they do business is very interesting. Every one of the big providers, like Dell, for example, they offer organizations content of all sorts on, networking and server and certification and storage and all the aspects that they provide organizations. They teach organizations to do the same thing. It's a major business for them. Cloud University from Rackspace. Rackspace is an online hosting provider. This is all open to the public. You can go there right now and you can take certifications and join MOOCs and all kinds of public education. They provide all of that for free in a freemium model because over time, organizations that are, or people or organizations that are consuming this neutral, independent, and useful third-party content or content from them eventually convert into customers because they remember that. And so they use it as a tool to sign up new customers. And in every single profession, there's continuing education, not only to get your license, but then what kind of education are you required to keep your license each year? You have to take 12 or 14 credits in this or that. But not every single profession, but most professions in that exist have this concept now in 2016, which is driving the sale of content. The Practicing Law Institute sells continuing legal education on dozens and dozens of topics that is good in all 50 states. In Canada, they're selling content to prepare for to get your firearms license and to keep your firearm license. Lynda.com, and which is now a part of LinkedIn, provides all kinds of skills for content for $25 a month. They're selling to develop your skills as a developer. Burt Rogers School down in Florida sells continuing education for real estate agents and appraisers. But because real estate agents and appraisers and every one of those professions is regulated at a state basis, there's organizations that are selling real estate prep in New York and in Michigan and in all 50 states and in every country. And so LMS providers are providing the backbone to do all that. Public organizations like the California Chamber of Commerce are using LMSs to create HR and harassment training that satisfies the need, and they sell it to California businesses and now have made a business selling it all across the United States. So public organizations selling this content. Northamptonshire Police in the UK are using an LMS system to sell content to speeders so that they don't get the points on their ticket, and they have 2,000 speeding tickets a month. They're turning into leads for their LMS and their sale of content. And so organizations like Harvard selling their content and continuing education. And same goes with American University, and all these university profession or these universities all have this intellectual capital that they're now turning into content for sale to try to get not just university traditional students, but to participate in the sale of content, the extended enterprise, continuing education content. And many of us have saw organizations like Coursera or edX or Khan Academy aggregating and assembling content on dozens of topics and selling or providing for free in various models. But all of those are a part of the LMS market in 2016, that sale of content. And so in 2016, there's almost 700 LMSs. In conclusion, there's almost 700 LMSs for a reason, and that reason is specialization. The cloud's enabled organizations to enter the LMS market, both buyers and sellers, at a much lower price point than ever before. This has allowed for all kinds of specialized solutions to surface, new ways of using learning, new ways of integrating it with marketing and with business to actually be a competitive strategic tool. All of this has caused the marketplace to just explode with competition. Yes, in the large-scale corporate marketplace, the top 10 LMS providers of the big talent management, integrated talent management providers rule. That is their domain. Outside of that, it's the wild, wild west. Inside of all areas, small, medium, and large, extended enterprise, there's no competitive leader. Inside of academic, there's competitive leaders, but it's very fragmented. inside of all of these marketplaces that are extended enterprise, those top 10 talent providers are not ruling, but everybody else is, and that's the segment of the marketplace that's on fire. So